everybody. I am Dr. Grace Lord, the host of Workforce, a podcast that blends behavioral science insights with workplace insights. In this episode, I am talking office fridge politics, and I'm also asking Christina Clark to define just what that is. Let's hear what she has to say, which also, I will give you a preview, involves champagne. Let's have a listen.
And I know you've come here to talk to us today about fridge politics. So yes. Can you explain to listeners what fridge politics is in the office?
Well, I was so thrilled to get this topic because I think, that the office fridge, a bit like the office microwave, warrants a bit of an anthropological study into it as to how respectful or disrespectful maybe a culture might be. And, in theory, an office is meant to bring people together. And of course, that's been challenged quite a lot by, COVID in recent times. And I would say that the same is true of the humble fridge. It either really brings people together or it can divide everyone. And I think you can really get a feel for the kind of prevailing etiquette or manners within an organization, depending on how people treat the fridge. One of the things I would say is that, it's a gathering place of camaraderie in a similar way to maybe the water cooler in the UK, maybe. And in Europe, I'd say the coffee machine is perhaps maybe more the sort of the gathering point. But maybe the purpose of the fridge is to make a place feel a bit more homely, and I think we've sort of seen that it could be, maybe a holding place for, a bottle of champagne, maybe to bring people together on a Friday after a hard week of work.
I need to come work. There's no champagne at LSE. I need to come work with you.
I think I need to stock up. But no, I think, depending on the type of organization, it's a place where, people gather to sort of raise their spirits or, to sort of hide their snacks if they don't want other people to have them. But usually it's sort of a way to kind of exchange a few words with, those colleagues that maybe you don't get a chance to meet in other parts of the building. But it can go sour, Grace. And, I think this is probably one of the things that, we could chat about today is, how some people do help themselves to those sort of treasured snacks, and we can end up with menacing notes, being left in the fridge, a warning against potential further food theft. I've read some really creative things like people considering leaving decoy sandwich bags that have mold on them, to prevent people from taking anything from them. But I think there's a lot of cultural symbolism actually in the fridge, and maybe I can take you back to the 1980s when, in advertising, when people had their own offices, it was quite a status symbol if you had your own fridge in the office. And I think back then it was like people were drinking aquavit, if it wasn't champagne, of course it was the 80s. Then we had the pre-2008 financial crisis, in some city firms, people would have a trolley that would come to you. There were, banks and things that would have sort of, birthday cakes and presents coming through to you from the kitchen on a trolley, etc. And of course, that all went with the financial crisis. And, nowadays we'd all be lucky to be able to find a corner to stash a chocolate bar in. So, it's changing times indeed. But I've seen this sort of, sorry, go on, Grace.
Because I was going to ask, what's your feeling about those emails or those notes that people leave? So I see these when things get stolen, and also when the fridge is quite messy. So if somebody has had bad fridge etiquette, that there tends to be either an email go out or somebody will leave a note to say it's not okay for you to leave your sour milk spilled. So is that a good idea from a colleague with respect to kind of making sure that the fridge etiquette goes back to where we want it to be? Or is that actually going to cause much more trouble than that person thinks when they're doing that?
Of course, there's the inevitable, ripple of, disgruntled noises, I think, that comes out, whenever a kind of group email like that goes round. But, of course, we need to reinforce the need for, respectful communication. I would say it's always better if it's, led by example. If someone sort of very senior within the organization, or even someone who's just very highly respected, just sends a note round just to say, look, hey, would you do this at home?
Yeah.
Harry Potter style, don't let the elves clean up after you, sort of thing. Then it's the responsibility is amongst us all. I don't think it needs to be a sort of, top down, being babied thing or anything like that. But just, a few people who are kind of good, strong culture carriers, like really enforcing those behaviors, I think is really important in an organization.
And you mentioned culture carrying, because I guess the other thing that I've seen is compliance mode, where everyone gets a week to clean the fridge. So regardless of where you are in the organization, whether you're the most senior or whether you're the person who's just joined on their first day and it's your first job, you will be assigned a time slot to clean the fridge. And I've seen that work well. So what if you go into an organization and you see that they rely on these type of rotas and these compliance-based mechanisms, what does it actually say about their culture?
Well, I think a mechanism like that, a rota where everyone has to do it, I think, is absolutely excellent, because it just means that, the people who think that they're too busy and too important to do it, can't get away with not doing it. And therefore that also becomes an example to everyone else. They would, as I said, they would behave differently in their own homes. So I think that kind of culture is the basis of a culture of respect. And we come back to psychological safety. If people feel that they can speak up if there's a problem, then we're then creating the grounds for better communication in other areas. It's that ripple effect.
Yeah, and that's why I'm interested in fridge politics, because I do think it is a pulse point for other. When we think about fridge politics, it does seem very, very funny, but I really believe it's a pulse point for other things in the organization that we need to go right in order to serve clients and to add value in the way that we want.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that comes to mind as well in terms of fridge politics, if we dive a bit closer into the contents of the fridge, that carton of milk or maybe that birthday cake, that might be indicative of a bit of emotional labor that's within the organization. I think you might be familiar with, there was a poll last year that talked about how, those gender-based or biased use of stereotypes, is widespread, with women being asked to make tea or coffee almost 3 times more than their male counterparts.
Yeah.
So, and also the same would fall to, if we're going to have a celebration to celebrate a colleague's birthday, that birthday cake will be, card will be procured probably more likely by a woman than a male counterpart. So, definitely when you're opening the fridge, you're seeing a whole range of socio-economic and political implications there.
And it's really depressing, because the woman is in a double bind, because if she does it, she's doing a non-promotable task. But if she doesn't do it, then she looks like a disgruntled colleague who doesn't want to help others. And I think that isn't given to men, that second naming type.
Absolutely. And I think, this reminds me a bit of, there was a book that was written, it was in the 90s, by a sociologist called Arlie Hochschild.
Yeah.
She talks about the time bind. And it was this idea of, the work and home becoming sort of a bit fluid in terms of the concepts, to keep, people very much based or working harder because everything is just on your doorstep already. But I think that term has perhaps been misplaced a little bit with the emotional labor that, they quote Arlie Hochschild, and I think it's changed from her original meaning of it somewhat. But that brings us to the beer fridge. That's another way of keeping us at our desks for longer.
So given kind of culture, kind of thinking about kind of the diversity of workforces today, do you believe that we should have a beer fridge, or is that something that has no longer a place in the workplace?
So it's interesting. I mean, I think habits are changing in general. We're seeing newer generations are much more healthy, health conscious. They're not really into drinking in the same way that, people were working, even 5-10 years ago. And so drinking at the office was sort of, seen as, hey, we've all been working on a project. We're all in close quarters with each other. Let's sort of bring the team spirit to the fore and, have a little cheers at our desk and then go out to the pub or whatever it is. It's very sort of maybe more of an Anglo-Saxon thing, I think. But, things are changing, and perhaps there are different ways of celebrating each other. I mean, I think as long as it's not a replacement for, paying people that overtime, then I think, of course, it's okay to, co-create something where people feel that they are being celebrated and they can, have that time together as a team to celebrate their achievements.
So Christina, I had a fridge, and I still have a fridge actually of my own that used to be in my office, because I was in a place where there was fridge politics and I didn't want to get involved with it. So the easiest thing for me was to buy this mini fridge. And now where we've moved offices, so the fridge will reside with the team. So what would you recommend for us to build a great culture that fridge should be used for?
I would say maybe find ways to, in a way, I would say cater to each other. So, maybe find ways that you can sort of share a meal. Maybe each person brings something different, and eventually, you come together to have some sort of, bread breaking at a table somewhere. I think those things are sort of very nice. If you give everybody sort of a little something that they feel that they can contribute, it's those kinds of like events which are sort of participation based. Like participation weddings or things like that, those kinds of gatherings where everyone feels like they have a bit of skin in the game, that sort of really brings people together.
Awesome. And what should I do if one of my colleagues steals my sandwich from the office fridge now that we've moved? We have a really good culture, but let's imagine that one colleague does snaffle my sandwich. How should I approach that in a way that both maintains the culture but make sure that it doesn't happen again?
I think the first thing is to not accuse anybody, to jump too quickly to conclusions, which, maybe
I'm a gunslinger, Christina. I'm a gunslinger. I'm going to, and I know already, Teresa Almeida, who's listening, she's the most likely culprit to steal my sandwich. I'm a gunslinger. I'm going to do it. I'm going to regret it, but I will. So by the time you've come in, I've already accused them of stealing the sandwich.
I would say the other thing is that, perhaps it's the highest form of flattery, because perhaps your sandwich was really delicious. That's the other thing. So, first of all, let's not jump to conclusions. Let's just be open to asking some questions about where the sandwich might have gone and, why.
I don't think we'll let a sandwich come between us and the team. So, that's one thing I'm confident with.
That's good to hear. I'm available for mediation if needed.
Oh, amazing. We might take you up on that. You never know. So do you have any kind of general advice for us kind of keeping the peace around fridge politics?
I think the importance is really respect. I'm going to come back to that because for me, that's the fundamental element. I think we need to make the rules of engagement really clear. And if there's an opportunity to co-create those rules of engagement with other people in the firm, and also it depends on the size of the firm, of course, or the company or the organization. If it's smaller, it's much easier to co-create those rules. I just say bring people along, for the ride, and say, these are the things that we'd like to achieve. How are we going to get there? And just make people part of that conversation and the output, because then they're going to be more committed to playing their part and their role in keeping that etiquette alive, as it were.